Okay, so Neckbone McGrizzle, you need to go ahead and shut all the way the fuck up. It's the last time we're going to do this. Look at that shit. Get mad. Get fucking mad. Now, I want you to watch very closely. Pay attention. See that? Right there. Made in the USA, Louisville, Kentucky. You know it's made in the USA in Louisville, Kentucky because it says so. Right there on the motherfucking label. Fucking simpleton. Whoever that guy was that took SWB fishing, I suggest you knock that shit off because he doesn't appreciate it. You'll never be his friend. He only makes appearances. And you know, if some shit popped off with some other fishermen on the lake, he most definitely would not have your back. Those are facts, Mr. Fisherman guy. Those are fucking facts. Used to be.
Turned into a violent conflict because of Sharon Tate's unexpected presence. They were hoping to go there to do a robbery and get away with a huge shipment of drugs that had been delivered just that evening. And that's a very important part of the case. Who delivered the drugs to the Tate residence that night? In fact, we now know that the FBI was observing that drug dealer and many of the other narcotics operations that were going on with these people. So the FBI were watching the inhabitants of the Tate house and this drug dealer who brought drugs to them. That's what Kasabian and Watson were trying to steal. So it's, if you can see the narrative, basically it continues to be a pattern of drug dealer stealing and killing drug dealer. That's what this is about. Sharon Tate, the people who committed the murder went out of their way to make sure she would not be there because...
Excuse the interruption. Number 14.
Obviously, they don't want a celebrity being involved in this because that's going to attract, unwanted publicity to this. So they even went out of their way to make sure she wasn't there. How did they know that? That gets into many more mysteries. But the fact is, because she was supposed to be, Sharon Tate, spending the night while she was heavily pregnant and due to deliver her child, she wasn't feeling well and she was going to spend the night with her best friend, a woman named Wells. She wasn't supposed to be there. And the group of people who murdered her didn't think she'd be there. When she appeared, Jay Sebring tried to protect her. It's a complicated story again that would take another hour to even begin to explain. But briefly, it turned into a physical fight between Sebring and Tex Watson, who I have to add was on methadone and had been for days. So he's a speed freak, freaking out as he gets into a violent confrontation when he's hoping to rob Jay Sebring and Frykowski of their drugs. It turned into violence that wasn't intended, and then it turned into a slaughter thereafter, basically because there can't be any more witnesses to the crime. That's the gist of what happened that night. To a degree, among the people on the Spahn Ranch, there had been discussion of committing a copycat murder, and I'm sure you've heard this theory, to make it look like the murderer of Gary Hinman was still loose, and Bobby Beausoleil had been arrested on August 6th. So right before that, he'd been arrested, and obviously they were concerned that he would talk about Manson's involvement, or somehow it would come back to the ranch of their involvement in the crime. So there was a lot of paranoia and tension after these crimes had committed. Now, the other factor, which Manson has said to me since 1985, pretty much whenever the crimes have come up, is that it was really all about the need to pay back the straight Satans who were aware that he had committed these felonies, the shooting of Bernard Crowe, the cutting of Gary Hinman with a weapon that belonged to them, which implicated them in the crime. So they were insisting they needed even more money from Manson and his group. In a way, you could say it was a sort of extortion. The straight Satans were pushing Manson to pay them back, and they weren't satisfied with what they were getting, which included some cars that were taken from Gary Hinman. That wasn't considered sufficient payment. So this increased desperate activity to steal drugs and to rob people was basically to pay back the straight Satans. Manson knew that. Whether the other people in his group knew it, I can't say. I kind of doubt it. Retroengineering what I've seen of the way Manson compartmentalizes his life and on a need-to-know basis only tells people what they need to know about what's happening. I think this was Charles Tex Watson and Linda Kasabian's effort to bring money into the communal pool, but I think it was an independent activity of their own. And of course, it was not going to kill random strangers to start a race war, which is just intrinsically absurd. It was for the same reasons as the two crimes before. So that's what happened that night. We can get into the mechanics of the actual crime, but, even the chronology of how these people were killed is different than you have been led to believe, for reasons that make sense in terms of the cover story. And in the Manson file, I explained from what I believe and from what I have gleaned from people who talk directly to the murderers in prison, where, of course, they tell a very different story than they tell to the parole board, to their lovers and to fellow prisoners. When you go to the parole board, you have to, I don't think a lot of people realize this, you cannot say, I lied in court. That isn't what happened. You have to go along with what you've been convicted for if you have any hope of gaining parole. So the convicted murderers, in this case, at their parole boards, continued to repeat the story that they were hypnotized by Manson to murder for these very vague reasons. Even they themselves don't tend to offer much credence to the helter-skelter nonsense that Bugliosi pushed. But that, from what I have gleaned of what actually happened, it was nothing like what you keep being told is happening.
For the audience, I do want to actually explore the mechanics of the murders. So much has been said and written, obviously so much from the mainstream media, but from your research, who killed whom on those nights?
I would say you have to consider that almost everything you say as a fact about this case is questionable, because the stories have, but sort of like the JFK assassination, a big problem with it is that these people have repeated their cover stories and their narratives so often that they've all blurred together into a mess. And as has been proven, even witnesses of a crime describe them wrongly. If they keep describing them, they start changing the details. And fact turns into fiction very quickly when you're under that kind of pressure, when you're being interrogated, all of that. So you have to consider, I believe there are great mysteries about what occurred in that house, when they occurred, who was responsible for them. One of the things I need to bring up here, which is one of the most enigmatic peculiarities of the whole thing, and nobody thinks about it very much unless they've really studied the case. Imagine this scenario. This hideous murder occurs. Shooting, stabbing, screaming. William Garretson was in the guest house at Cielo Drive. He was a young man, Rudy Altobelli, the owner of the property, who had rented it previously to Terry Melcher and who now rented it to Roman Polanski. This young man was the houseboy of Rudy Altobelli. He was watching the guest house on the property while Rudy Altobelli was away in Europe. William Garretson claimed at first, when the police arrived the next day to find this carnage, this, bloody scene in the front house and on the front lawn, that he didn't hear anything that night. Why, if these killers had gone to kill everyone in the house, which is the legend that Manson supposedly ordered Tex Watson to go there and kill everybody, why would this young houseboy be spared? How could he have not heard anything? I have the police reports in which neighbors pretty far away heard screaming, shooting, reported it even. He didn't hear anything. He didn't see anything, according to his first story to the police. This is one of the ultimate mysteries of the whole case, is what was William Garretson's role? Did he know in advance that this was going to happen? There are some indications of that. Was he complicit in some way in what happened? Did he cooperate or enable what happened? And another thing to keep in mind is another person that's completely usually written out of the whole thing is Steve Parent, this teenager who was killed in the driveway, who you may vaguely recall, was visiting William Garretson that night, supposedly at midnight to sell him a clock radio. And again, like Dennis Wilson and Tex Watson supposedly being invited over for a cup of coffee, I don't believe Steve Parent was going to this notorious drug and party house about an alarm clock. But that's the official story. So, there are so many mysteries about that one evening alone, let alone all the other crimes. Just think about that. He survived the night, supposedly didn't hear anything. He was arrested as the main suspect the next morning when the murders were discovered. And the story he told the police, and I've read the report, it's publicly available, is completely hard to accept whatsoever, what he tells them. So to what degree was this young man, William Garretson, complicit in or in some way aware of why and what happened? The problem, as is true with almost everyone involved in this case, later in life he told such ridiculous stories. For instance, in the 90s, he got involved with a woman who claimed to be, as absurd as this sounds, the unborn child of Sharon Tate. She claimed that she was cut out of Sharon Tate's womb. And then this guy, William Garretson, actually promulgated this idiotic story that this woman was Roman Polanski and Sharon Tate's child. So he completely blew, and you can look into that. He really seemed to believe that. And he said a lot of interesting things that are very incriminating, implying that other